So welcome to you all from wherever you're joining us from. It's great to have you here. I'm Therese Proctor. I'm a senior partner at OrgShakers, which is part of OrgShakers, and it's the human capital side. I spent over 10 years as a former CPO in financial services. I have completed 40 years in business, mainly in HR. I've got two very inspirational daughters. One I think is on the call. And I always talk about the fact that, you know, no matter what age you are, where you're from, whatever you do, we're always learning. And I'm looking forward to learning some great insights today. On March the 8th, we celebrated International Women's Day, and the global theme was inspiring inclusion. Now, the United Nations was very close. Their theme this year was invest in women, accelerate progress. Now, you and I know that women's participation in society is of the essence, including in decision-making positions. So that's why I'm excited to continue this discussion today. It is about inspiring inclusion. And we're doing it now because it isn't just one day that we should be talking about it. It's each and every day. And it's really, really important. It's an all year round topic. And it's one that I'm most passionate and believe in. I feel that everybody should have the opportunity to feel welcome, to be trusted, to feel that they can be themselves. We will be able to take questions all the way through this, but I ask that you put them into the chat box, and about 15 minutes before the end, either I'll remember or I'm going to get prompted to stop, so that if you feel like you want to, you can join in the discussion also. I'm now very, very excited and privileged to introduce to you our three very own inspirational speakers. They're all recognized in their field of excellence as women leaders, but also leaders who champion others. They take people with them and they demonstrate inspirational leadership and inclusion every day. The first speaker I'd like to introduce you to is a senior partner at OrgShakers, Catherine Bass-Black. She works across the industrial, consumer, board, and all the leadership practices. She's got firsthand, she can demonstrate and she can talk to us firsthand about how important it is to have women in business and how successful women in business are those that include others. She's also, and I hope that she doesn't mind me mentioning this, she's also on maternity leave. So we are extremely grateful that she's given up today to share her thoughts with you. So thank you, Catherine, for that.
Happy to be here.
Kelly Hammersmith. So Kelly is the Chief Communications Officer at Advantage Solutions. And she knows firsthand how important it is that words and actions come together and do the same thing. She leads on all aspects across their corporate narrative, including internal, external, and executive communication. And she's a powerful advocate for inclusion. And finally, on to Monique McLeod, who I have to say gets the star prize for the classiest, most beautiful background. I'm sure she'll tell you in a while about that, but it's very enviable. She's a great HR leader, and is the Assistant Dean for Organizational Development, Culture and Equity at the University of Colorado Boulder. She is leading and partnering in the design of the DEI strategy. So to the speakers, I'm delighted to welcome you. I thank you for taking the time today to get very energized around this very exciting discussion on inclusive leadership. So to get some context, when we're thinking about inspiring inclusion, it does mean different things to different people. But fundamentally, I think if we reflect, we all know that the outcome that we want is to create an environment that's both welcoming and supportive, where everyone feels like they can belong. We hear culture used a lot, you know, all the time. You know, they're a culture carrier, they're not. It's all about the culture, create the culture. But if we try and make some sense of it all, we know that having a good culture, what it actually means, the output is that everyone can be themselves. Everyone can bring their best version of themselves to work or any societal event that they're at. And they can be at their best when they're there. For me, when I think about culture, to make it as simple as possible, I think about what Dave Ulrich taught. Now, he's the guru, the HR global guru of all things HR. And he talks very eloquently, but he talks about the way in which you inspire a culture, the way in which you inspire inclusion is made up of 3 ingredients. And, you know, if we think about that, we can put them into these 3 very simple buckets. The first thing you've got to do is you've got to lead from the top. We know that what leaders say is important. Of course it is. You know, they can hide behind company literature. They can do whatever they want to do. What they say is important. Their intentions are pure. But more importantly, what do they do? You know, do their actions match what they say they're going to do? So that for me is really fundamental. It's the starting point. You lead from the top. You know, and by the way, if you're a mother or an aunt or whatever, you know, your words as a mother are really important. You know, and that's why I think women excel in this, perhaps, and have the edge over men. You know, we're used to role modeling, helping, supporting, nurturing, leading from the top, leading with example. But our words have definitely got to be in line with our actions. The second ingredient that Ulrich talks to us about is bottom up. Yeah, it's the second bucket, bottom up. You know, what do the people that we try and inspire say about us? What's the stories that they tell? What do they feel about being in an environment that we've created? What's the chat that goes on? You know, we talk about the water cooler chat. More difficult now when we're all working in a hybrid way. But what are we picking up? What are the signals that we're picking up? Do we know if people are happy? Do we know if our messages have landed? You know, so the second important ingredient is, what are people saying? And more importantly, again, what are they doing as a result of the actions? And the third bucket is this side to side piece, which is, if organizations want to be truly inclusive, what are they doing to demonstrate that they are having inclusive policies, processes, procedures, etc. You know, we're striving to get more women into business and into very senior positions. I would say that in the UK, Europe, and the US, you know, we were doing very well until the pandemic, and then things have slowed down. You know, there's significant impacts and actions that need to happen if by 2030 we're going to hit all the targets that have been set globally. And that takes a lot of effort, a really lot of effort. Doesn't matter that you're recruiting lots of women in. What are you doing once they're in? What are you doing to make sure that those people can thrive and survive and reach the top of organizations? So again, you know, if we think about it in a very simple way, you know, lead from the top, bottom up, what are people saying, and then side to side, what actions are we taking? You know, we'll stand some chance, I think, of getting there. So taking that first question, or taking that model, what I'd like to do is pose my first question to the panel, which is, you know, what is it that you have seen, or who is it that's inspired you as a female, that's made you want to go that extra mile, that's made you feel like they've done everything to include you? And I'd really like to start with that, with Monique, if you don't mind opening us up, Monique, on that. You know, which females inspired you, and why? You know, what did that look like?
Thank you for the question, and thank you to OrgShakers for having us on the panel, and with this fantastic group of participants. I'm really honored to be speaking with all of you. And I'll tell you, when Arnold Green reached out and asked me to speak on behalf of OrgShakers and told me what we would be speaking on, I froze. That was my first response, not because I'm not used to public speaking, but because this was a very difficult question for me to answer. And I don't think the answer is what everyone wants to hear. And I had to really debate how authentic I would be with my response and sort of probe the team to say, is there anything in particular that you want me to say? And you all graciously said, tell your story. And I'll tell you, my struggle with this answer was because I didn't have a lot of role models for female leadership throughout my career. I learned my craft from men. And what I learned very quickly is that the style that I observed and learned from the men that I worked with, who were in more senior positions than me that I emulated, doesn't work for women.
Yeah.
And it definitely doesn't work for Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to really pull examples from bits and pieces of things that I saw from female leaders who were successful, as well as learn from, because I started my career in the early 90s, where you had to be one of the guys to be successful, working with unions, working in factory environments, working in financial spaces and medical spaces, and eventually even in industries that are more associated with women like fashion, becoming the head of HR in those organizations and in startups and tech. I had to develop a style that was authentic for myself, that honored my integrity and my ethics and my values, but also was unapologetic. Because I often find in spaces that people expect women to apologize for being leaders, which is something that I just refuse to do. And so I instead tried to piece together and develop in my leadership style the type of leader that I always wanted for myself. And I'll tell you, very recently, I'd say within the past year, I found someone online named Jenny Clark. And I'm embarrassed to say, the first time I saw one of her videos, I cried. Because she was the leader that I wish I always had throughout my career, to guide me and to encourage me and to give me tough feedback and to tell it how it is, but from a place of intent that is positive and encouraging. And so that's who I still look to and who I suggest other people look at when they're in a situation like me, where they don't have experiences of female leadership to look to for their career. That fortunately, in this day and age of the internet and remote access to people, we can find those things outside of our immediate work environment. And I really encourage people, when they feel that there's a gap, to do that, and then to figure out how to be that leader that you've always wanted.
Yeah.
So I would say, it's from a work perspective, it's Jenny Clark.
Brilliant. So all of you listening, I think that's a great advocate for Jenny Clark. And I think, Monique, one of the things that you said, which I think really resonated with me, is that when you looked up, there wasn't anybody that looked like you. And equally, there wasn't anybody that was a woman that you would look at and feel that they were an inspiration for you. And, I'm pleased that there is, that there is a generation that can look up and at least be inspired to think there's a chance, because I think that's a really important point. And therefore, if you haven't got somebody that you can take the best sprinklings from, you have to find it within yourself and dig deep. So, thank you for that. And thank you for sharing your story. So, Kelly, I'm going to come on to you next.
Yeah, no, I definitely echo some of the sentiment around not seeing as many women leaders who look like us. I will say, from for myself, I was brought on to our C-suite last year, and I'm acutely mindful that I represent the 3% of C-suite leaders who are Black women. And when you add to that, I joined the C-suite at 38 years old as a millennial. It can be that much more alienating to know that there aren't many young moms with, a 3 and a 5-year-old while they're navigating C-suite dynamics. And I will say that throughout my career, especially, I've consistently heard people refer to millennials as kids, and we're grown adults. And how that has influenced how I navigate, because it can feel diminishing. For me, I too have had to be unapologetic about showing up as my authentic self, because there's nothing else I know how to do. I had a mentor who was also a chief of HR, a Black woman, who really helped me to own my own values. And so when you're feeling that dissonance, when you feel like you are being evaluated on how you show up in spaces that weren't necessarily designed for you or by people that look like you, it can feel like you're doing something wrong. For me, I know personally, I thrive in environments where I know for all I bring to the table, I belong. And it's really important for me to make sure other people feel that way. And so you talked a little bit about some of the things that you want to make sure that people are experiencing as it relates to inspiring inclusion. But safety is one of those things that we sometimes overlook, that psychological safety.
Yeah.
Is it okay for me to show up and be a woman who is Black, who's a millennial, who has neurodiversity, who is unapologetic about every Thursday? I have my therapy on my calendar because I know if I am at my best, I can bring my best. And so really demystifying what it means to lead. What it means to lead is to be human. I will say that the woman that inspired me most are the women in my family because of their resilience. My grandmother moved from Mississippi to Chicago during the Great Migration, where droves of Black folks were leaving the South for the North, given the economic conditions and the amount of lynchings that were happening. She brought her family to live in the basement of her mother's home. And from there, on the west side of Chicago, she worked at a pharmacy. She worked at a cleaner. She worked multiple jobs, and ultimately, as a single mother, bought her own home. She created programming for kids in the community so that they can see a better future for themselves. And she poured into others even when her cup there wasn't much left to pour. And so I firmly believe you stand on the shoulders of those who came before you. And that sense of resilience has inspired me. But also there are some fights that you don't need to fight. And so the CEO of Essence Communications, Caroline Wanga, often says, if you can't be who you are where you are, change where you are.
Yeah.
And so, and it's a beautiful way of articulating that power of resilience, because no one can define you but you. And the importance of working at a place where you have shared values, or for me in this environment, being able to shape what those values look like. Is really critical, because then that resilience isn't as important so much as you see that, we have the power of being unified without being uniform. We don't all have to be the same or have the same background and same experiences, but ultimately we can win together if we celebrate the differences and those experiences that we have and perspectives that make us so much better. If we were going to go back to sports analogies, which I've worked in all boys clubs and all boys environments, you can't run out on a football field and win the game if you have a team full of quarterbacks. We all have to embrace our roles as players on the same team, and that's ultimately how you win together, which is one of the values we have at our organization. So I think I've learned from some of the best women out there who are just, how they show up as humans, how they lead authentically. And quite frankly, I've learned some of the best leadership tips from people who weren't the best leaders. If you look back and think about the leaders you respect most in your life, it's not, and that made the biggest impact on you. It's not the folks who had the highest intelligence or the best skill set. That's not what you remember. You remember how they made you feel.
Yeah.
Which I think there's a Maya Angelou quote about that, I believe.
Yeah.
Because they had strong EQ, and it wasn't really about the IQ. And so leading with empathy, leading with integrity, getting to know someone so well where you can advocate on their behalf, is really, really critical. So I feel like I learned bits and pieces of how to be a better me from the other humans that I've interacted with, for better or worse. And that has inspired me to be proud of who I am and try to be an illuminator for others to bring out the best in them.
Kelly, thank you for that. I think you touched on, and it was, your story is wonderful. I think it touches on a couple of really important points. You know, we think when we're thinking about, you know, who's the most inspirational person we've ever come across. You know, I've for years said the most inspirational person that I've ever come across is my mum. You know, she left Ireland at 15, and I look at her, she's 86, and I look at her and I think actually she is a leader. You know, she does corral people, she does motivate people, she gets me to do stuff that I don't really want to do. I don't know how she does it, but I do it. So, you know, I sort of think we do learn so much from others. It's taking the best of that from people. You also touched around the importance of emotional intelligence. You know, people that you've learned from aren't just the people that are great at what they do. You also learn from the things that they aren't so great at. You know, they're the pitfalls that you don't want to fall into yourself. You know, I'm tall. You can't tell from the screen. You know, I'm nearly 6 foot tall. But you know, I remember very early on in my career being told that I was too tall. Don't wear skirts. And then I used to wear trousers, and they said, "Oh, your legs are too long. Wear skirts." You know, you speak differently to most people. Do you want elocution lessons? It's like, no, you know, you're too blonde, cut your hair. You're too, you know, the list was endless. And like Monique said, you know, I very often found myself apologizing for how I looked or how I sounded. I would never do that to someone else, knowing how it felt to be on the receiving end of that. So emotion intelligence, I think all of us are placing so much more effort and focus around. And I think, Catherine, this is a really nice time for you to share your story, because you're interviewing senior people all the time. And there is definitely more of a focus around not just what you do as a leader, but how you do it. And more businesses are looking at leadership being, you know, can people take people with them? Can they live values? You know, do they really walk the talk? So it will be really interesting, you know, on two counts, really. One, to have your story and your inspirational woman, but secondly, that piece around the work that you do every day.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, I'm just inspired by Monique and Kelly. So thank you both for sharing your stories. And I think, Monique, what I took, you know, away from you, especially, is I think I had a oh boy, or oh girl moment. Who do I think, or who do I look to, you know, initially, that inspires me? And I really had to think, because I really came up, you know, in this industry and in my career, you know, under the great inspiration and mentorship of men who included a female voice at the table. And so it's still a heavily male dominated organization and industry and space. And so, you know, and I'm grateful, incredibly grateful for, you know, the men who have inspired and included, you know, the female voice. And I don't want to undercut that, because I think it's just as important as, you know, the lack of having, because there's a lack of women at the top to, you know, be the image to inspire others, that, you know, we need to give credit to the men who have lifted us up to be there. And Kelly, you know, and thank you for your authentic story around, you know, resilience and authenticity. I mean, that cannot be, you know, overstated. And so very much appreciate that. So I know you asked me, Teresa, more around sort of the workplace, but I do want to, you know, speak a little bit about, you know, who, as I thought through who did inspire me, you know, to do some of the work and focus of what I do or how I do it, is Claudia Golden. And some of you may know or have heard of Claudia, but She's a Harvard professor, and she was awarded the Nobel Prize in economics this last year. She was the third female to be awarded the Nobel Prize in economics. And she really accomplished groundbreaking work as an economic historian and labor economist. And she studied over decades women's participation in the workforce. And I had the privilege to interview Claudia or Dr. Golden in May of 2020 when we were looking at this time of how do we retain women in the workforce in a post-COVID world. Well, literally, did we know this, white paper that a colleague and I were writing and interviewing folks who are post-COVID. When does post-COVID stop? We were at that point, we're like, okay, we'll be done. The curve will be flat. We'll be back to it. And how do we retain women in the workforce? But our work has gone far beyond that. But what inspired me is she really brought and brings, an academic approach to inclusion and how do we, include women and females, that inspires me, personally to encourage women to remain in the workforce. And, the data there is just shocking and somewhat discouraging for, women who even briefly decrease their participation in the workforce, see long-term deflation in their earnings potential. It also, reinvigorates that stereotype that women are less committed to their careers than their male counterparts. And, so studying someone and looking to someone's work like Dr. Golden's, it reinforces how important, my role is, and we'll call it executive search and supporting organizations, but to encourage, do my role to inspire not only companies and leaders, but also women themselves to, I don't want to say hang on, but but to push themselves, because it is so critically important that if we do not keep women in this pipeline and in the leadership, I'm gonna call it funnel, the leaky pipeline that we talk about sometimes, that it just can have a massive impact on the work that we've done over decades to get women in leadership roles. Now we have to keep them and to continue to inspire more to continue and come up the ranks. So that's someone who's inspired me. But I mean, just learning and hearing from you all is something that's just incredible. But that's where I bring my gifts and my passion to bear is, I know how damaging it can be if we don't continue to include and encourage, women and support them in leadership roles.
And let's be clear too. I mean, we see what was happening with the NCAA tournament and Caitlin Clark. How she's shined a light on the power of women as athletes. I mean, let's be clear. Women have always been worthy.
Yes.
We've always been great. And in fact, in the face of barriers and obstacles that we didn't put in our own path and being able to overcome them. And I think, for me as a communicator, and I have my roots in journalism and being a reporter, I firmly believe that we are all just a collection of stories. And the more we can share those stories, the more we can change the narrative. And her elevation has surely changed the narrative. And that's our opportunity moving forward, is being the same example and providing the example and lifting others up to say, we've been here and we've been amazing and badasses all along.
Yeah.
And how do we help others shine their lights even brighter? There's a book I have from David Brooks. Have you guys read this? How to Know a Person?
Mm-mm.
No, but it sounds like one we should.
You should. I want to read an excerpt from this. In every crowd, there are diminishers and there are illuminators. Diminishers make people feel small and unseen. They see other people as things to be used, not as persons to be befriended. They stereotype and ignore. They're so involved with themselves that other people are just not on their radar screen. Illuminators, on the other hand, have a persistent curiosity about other people. They have been trained or have trained themselves in the craft of understanding others. They know what to look for and how to ask the right questions at the right time. They shine the brightness of their care on people and make them feel bigger, deeper, respected, and lit up. And for me, I very much feel like my purpose is to be an illuminator, to shine, to help others shine their light or to shine light on others. And, so much of what we've all faced in various corners of our life are those diminishers.
Yeah.
And so every day waking up and say, how can I illuminate others? How can I be an illuminator or a beacon of light? I just think it was just such a beautiful way to speak to how we see each other, because I think we all can think of the illuminators and diminishers we've crossed paths with in our lives. But I think we can also help our world shine brighter if we see each other better. And so much of that is how we expose each other to stories that we've never heard, never seen. And surely, like I said, with Caitlin Clark, she surely is illuminating something that has always been true, and now we're forced to recognize.
Yeah, I think that's lovely. Thank you both, Kelly and Catherine, for that. I think the piece around diminishers, the mood hoovers, the people that suck our energy and know they're doing it, having to dig deep and have that resilience and know what's going on, but be smart enough to overcome it anyway. Even by doing that, you're a role model for other people to watch and learn and see how that goes. One of the things also that you mentioned, Catherine, when people step off the treadmill for a while, for whatever reason it might be, through absence, through sickness, or through pregnancy, or caring for others, what tends to happen in my experience is that people lose a little bit of their confidence. And when they lose their confidence, that kind of noise inside their head is, well, you're not going to be able to get back to where you were. You're not going to earn as much. You're not going to be good. You've been out of it. You've been out of your game. You're not top in class anymore. That is the noise that we've got to stop for people. And very often, and we're going to come on to it now in terms of what we can do to help people. Very often we're in a position where I think if we can help with processes and policies, it means then when people are absent and they're away from work, we can make sure that we're keeping in contact with them for whenever is right for them and however is right for them to return. Because it might not be right for everybody to return immediately. It might be phased approaches, it might be days, it might be, it might be weeks, months, years, doesn't matter. We know that those people are talented. Just because they've stepped away doesn't mean that their cognitive behaviors and their cognitive ability has gone down. So I think you're all making really, really powerful points, which are important. I guess the next thing is if we can lead from the top, if we can inspire, if we can get people to tell great stories, if we can make people feel great, what is it that we can do in our organizations to make sure that we're creating that environment for people to bring their best selves to work? And Monique, if I could start with you again, you're shaping the DEI strategy. What do you do to try and make the environment inclusive?
Sure, thanks for the question. So while I'm a certified DEI specialist, I'm an HR professional and a lawyer by trade. And so everything that I do in the DEI space, which I've been doing throughout my career before there was a label for the work, it really is centered around equity and fairness. And that's been a theme. I come from a family of, civil rights activists in their own right, and people who have really forged paths for change. And my mother, who I don't want to talk about because she passed away recently, and I'll get too emotional about it, really embedded values in me that are immovable.
Yeah.
And so when I think about what the way that I foster inclusion, when I became a leader, I made a promise to the team that reported to me. And a large quantity of them have been women, but I make this promise uniformly across the team. that if you allow me to develop you, I will support you throughout your career. And it's a promise. And I remind them of that if they leave the organization. And the people that have taken me up on that offer, my goal is to make them my peer. And so when I'm coaching and developing people, I'm very, very clear with women in particular, because I see a confidence issue very often in female employees that I don't see in my male employees. I make sure they understand where they're moving in their development and where they can continue to grow, but also what they're doing really well and what they need to do to be my peer. And I make sure they understand my goal is to make them my peer. So having that space, that door open where individuals know that I'm not operating in bias, I think is the leadership example that I demonstrate. That there's no golden children being handpicked, and there's no you fit the profile and you don't, and etc. And it's at your pace of development. But there's a flip side to that challenge, which is also that I'm going to be radically honest with you when you're demonstrating bias. And that comes in every form. When you're doing compensation analysis, when you're doing employee relations evaluations, and you're intervening and coaching people, when you're advocating for some and not others, why? When you're involved in the interview process, it goes back to processes. And so as a DEI practitioner, I'm very much tied to both the legal and human resources skills that I've gained over the years. And I merge them around concepts of equity and fairness and justice. And to be objective. And I'm constantly reminding my teams when they're making these really, really crucial decisions that impact people's lives. How much money are you going to make? Are you going to be disciplined, and to what extent? What is your career path? There's a lot of influence and power in having influence over those decisions that they must get educated in principles of bias and diversity. They must.
And that, I think that cuts to the heart of so much. Fairness, objectiveness, equality, equity, being able to speak up and speak out when things aren't right, and also nurturing talent and giving feedback. All of those are great ingredients for creating a culture where people can show up and be their best. Kelly, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think it's critical to operationalize inclusion and belonging, and make sure there's an accountability lever. So, I often tell people, I don't want to tell a story and hope that actions rise to that story. I want the story to rise to the actions. And in order to influence that, it's like, who do we want to be when we grow up? We want to be an inclusive workforce. We want to create an environment of belonging. Great. What is the data saying about where we are now in order to get to where we want to go? And for our organization that has grown through acquisition, but never through integration over the past year, we've said, how do we recruit everyone as players on the same team winning together? And so it required us to write a new mission, purpose, and values, but I wasn't going to write words that just were going to sit on a wall or a web page. That work influenced the framework of our new performance management. So where organizations will oftentimes prioritize profitability over people, we've shifted the paradigm to say we care about people first. And by delivering through people and purpose, the outcome is stronger performance. And that requires us to live our values in service of other people, in service of others, every stakeholder, our teammates, our clients in the CPG industry, our customers at retail, our investors, our communities. And what does that mean? When you're prioritizing profitability over people, it means you can show up and be a jerk and get a great year-end bonus as a result. But what you do has to be, how you got there needs to be just as important as what you do.
Absolutely. And I think measuring, sorry to cut over you, but I think measuring is so important, because if you're going to have a zero tolerance, if you are going to operationalize, which I absolutely agree with, if you are going to operationalize inclusivity, if you are going to make that matter, then you have to show that it matters. So you have
Right.
to measure it. And then I think in terms of, if you're going to stick by that, then you've got to have zero tolerance for bad behavior. And when that starts to happen, it frightens organizations, because we know, if you've got a person who's a powerhouse, they work incredibly hard, they bring the money in, they're great for the bottom line. It's a very brave CEO who's going to say, okay, that person doesn't live the values, he's not making, or she's not making an environment where people feel safe. Going back to the psychological safety point, let them go. That's a very brave thing to do. But when you start to make that happen, you start to change the organization for the better, because you get much better results. So
Yeah.
Kelly, completely agree with you. Catherine, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I love once again, you put me in the hard seat of actually going after these two,
I know.
intelligent and wonderful women here. Talk around training and operationalizing, this focus. And, I'm going to be fairly simple of, how I do this, or how we approach it. My approach is, I bring my authentic self to work first. And, to my clients, to my colleagues, to the peers, I bring who I am. I'm not apologetic for being a mother, for being a woman, and, for having deep faith. I bring my values, with me of who I am, and sort of share who I am. And I think that encourages, others to not be afraid, to speak about, what's important to them and what their values are. And so, when we, and just from a leadership perspective, we're retained, by clients, but we're not successful unless this is an opportunity for both a candidate, a leader, and, a company or organization to really meld those values together. And so it is just as important that we understand, who the authentic individual is, who their values are, and how they'll align with the organizations they support. And so, I start just by being my authentic self, to encourage others to, share with me what makes you tick, what's important to you, how does this align, with another organization, and how will you be a culture add from that capacity. And then I think the other very simple, approach I take is, I always ask myself, who is missing from this conversation? And, whose voice is not here? Who is not represented in this slate? Who is not represented at the table of stakeholders? Where do we encourage to make sure that we are lifting up voices in all areas, so that we're getting a full picture and that we're including all elements? And so it's a very simple question that we can just ask ourselves in meetings, in our day-to-day lives, whose voice is missing? And that question, really just encourages inclusion in and of itself. And so I think those are sort of two, small, simple things, that I can do personally, or that we can do, to encourage inclusion in our own organizations, or, among our colleagues.
I think you underplay your brilliance, Catherine, because
Absolutely.
in terms of simple things, asking that question, who's missing at the table, who else would have a different perspective, is extremely powerful. And shamefully, all too often, that doesn't happen. And you find out that the person that's got, the voice that could add so much has been omitted. The other thing, and I'll thank you for this, is putting the spotlight on yourself. So all of us, whatever job we do as leaders, it starts with us. If we try and show up and be someone else, and we're not authentic, and we cover, 30% of us has gone anyway. So, whatever hope we've got of all being brilliant, we have to be ourselves. And if that means being vulnerable, if it means actually saying, I've got to go home on Tuesday at this time, or this is happening in my life, that's real. That's real life. Nobody wants to come in and show up and talk to people that are fake. We don't want fakes in our life. You know, you get exposed anyway. So I think to create that environment and to make people feel comfortable, for clients to trust you, so that what they see, they like, they buy into, they come back. It doesn't matter whether that's a customer on a till, you know, if that doesn't matter if it's the team leader or a person on a till or somebody showing up to pass off your deliveries. If you can be yourself, you'll gain the trust of others and others will want more. So, you know, it makes perfect sense for business. Before we close, I'm conscious of time. I'm going to hand over to Andy and Adam, who are OrgShakers, have been behind the scenes doing all the good work to make sure that we all appear. If I could pass over to Andy, I think he might have a question or two for us.
Yeah,
Andy?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I've been monitoring the chat as we're coming through, and just to say, if you've got any questions that you want to ask, if you can put them into the chat. I can see already one or two of you have now started adding some questions in. But can I start by just asking a question from a male perspective? And I think that you'll see this is a question I think only a male could ask. Is you made the comment that when you were looking for female leaders, you found very few, and you also said the same thing, that you started looking to male leaders early on in your careers and so on, and learning from them. Thanks to those male leaders, you could argue, if you look at where we are now globally when it comes to global warming, climate change, geopolitics, pick anything you want, we're maybe not in the best place that we could be. So what should the next generation of male and female leaders be learning by looking up at today's female leaders, looking up to women like yourselves?
May I
Great
interject?
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's just something I feel I need to say about that question. And I alluded to it from my experience, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I think it's not always the correct assumption to assume that just because a leader is female, that she's not making the same decisions as men. There's a generation of female leaders who learn to emulate the decision-making of men in their environment. And I think you see the generational difference just in the stories that we've told. I'm Gen X, Kelly is millennial. And in that short shift of time, we had a different set of leadership examples.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And so I think part of it is, and I see even with our earlier generation coming into the workforce now, they're less gender specific about everything. And so when they've learned differently, they've learned how to collaborate differently, they've learned how to make decisions differently because of shifts in our educational system, at least in the US.
Mm.
And so I think what we need to center back is to productive and healthy leadership decision making that is not politicized, but that is aligned with a central set of values that are benefiting the world. And it's difficult to not politicize that because there's differences of opinion about what that means. But we have to get back to a place where there's a standard of what it means to be a leader. Right now, we're leading through cult of personality around the world. And that is not a substitute for leadership.
Mm.
And I really strongly believe that if we place gender on this issue, it will continue to further politicize it and separate the really real core problem that we're having as humans, as humanity.
Yeah, just be human.
Around
Yeah, we need to be human.
ethical, human-centered decision making. So I just felt the need to say it, not to not answer your question. I think there's an answer that needs to be given to your question, but I really felt strongly to say that.
I think that's the
I
answer.
will
on that.
I think that's the answer. I don't think there's a deeper answer than that. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you, applaud you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Kelly, did you want to add anything?
Oh, I was just, I mean, I was echoing just to be human. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, my CEO, it was interesting earlier, Teresa, when you were saying that like it takes a lot of courage for a leader to remove someone who isn't being inclusive or whatever. I just think it takes a human leader. I think
Yeah.
it takes a purpose. I don't think it requires bravery at all. I think you just need to be human and authentic. And one of the things our CEO, Dave Peacock, often says is when you think about inclusion, and if you say you don't want inclusion, well, what's the opposite of inclusion?
Yeah.
It's exclusion. Okay, no matter who you are, where you came from, what you do, raise your hand if you've ever been excluded from anything in your life. Everyone's felt exclusion. How did that feel? Did you enjoy it? Did it make you better? So how does exclusion make any of us better?
Yeah.
And those are the things we have to think of. You know, we want you, ultimately you do want inclusion and you do want belonging. And oftentimes we have to sit with our own mindsets around what that means. But at its core, for things that are often politicized, it's actually we need to humanize.
Yeah.
And being human, seeing people where they, you know, for who they are and what they can be, because you can find commonality with just about anyone. If you take the time to realize, okay, I can be inclusive. We're players on the same team, and we ultimately want to succeed together. I often see too when we're talking about workplaces. Ultimately, it's a community. You want your community to feel safe. We want our community to thrive. We need to be in it together.
Yeah.
And so I think we just overthink it, and it comes down to really just being human.
Yeah, and knowing each other, you know, the whole thing about being on a team is, you know, someone made the point earlier, you know, you can have a team, but you don't want all quarterbacks. You have to understand the strengths of the people that you've got and what they're bringing. And you can only do that if you can create an environment where you can spot that talent, operationalize what you're doing, have policies and processes in place to support people so that you're not caught out by any bias. You know, whether that's male, female, color, race, you know, whatever it might be, because people do have blind spots. And, you know, we're not in a place unless inclusion is operationalized where people really understand the fundamentals of what diversity inclusion actually looks like and what's my role in that, it will never go away. I read recently about a woman who started a business, and admittedly, it was some years ago. She was an engineer and she started a business, and she made it her point that she only had female engineers working for her. When she started to get business, they turned their nose up because she was a woman. She changed her name. It was a game changer. You know, we should never be, and it was just a bias that people thought, well, actually, if she's working, if a person's in that field, you know, their thought process is that was a man. You know, those examples, those stories should become less and less, and it should be about, you know, what people bring. Andy, I don't know if we've got time for one more quick question.
Yeah, one more quick one, and thank you everyone that's brought questions through. What I'll do is I'll share those with the panel afterwards, and when we repost the video of this session, we'll perhaps put some of the answers to those questions along there so those don't get lost. But yeah, going back to something, Kelly, that you said right at the beginning, Sam's come through the question saying you stand on the shoulders of those who go before you. So picking up on that brilliant thought, what would you want your legacy to be as a leader? And I'm not just pointing this at Kelly, it's picking up on your quote, just to all four of you as leaders. What would you want your legacy to be? What would you want to be remembered for by those that are looking up to you?
For me, it's just being an illuminator, being an enabler, for others. You know, when I was in the beer business, you know, that's one of those businesses that surely is considered an old boys club. And one of the things we quickly realized was that, you know, we weren't being as equitable about opportunities for women in the organization. They were leaving the organization at rates higher than others. The higher you went up in the organization, you weren't seeing as many female representation. And so we decided to operationalize DE&I. As we talked about our quarterly business performance, we also talked about where we stood as it related to our representation. We started equipping the organization to be great. But also, if you remember, a decade ago in the beer business, women were treated as accessories to the story and not as heroes of the story.
Yeah.
Women have advanced degrees at rates higher than men nowadays. Women control consumer spending in the US. And so just as we wanted to transform the company from the inside out, we also educated our marketers and our sales teams and our distributors on the value of embracing and including women we stopped portraying women as the bimbos that they were portrayed in ads, and, you know, not serving beer while we're scantily clad, but we are powerful and we are strong. Think back to Caitlin Clark. And so what we did at that organization not only increased retention, increased representation of women, but also grew share with women externally, and the entire industry took note and followed suit. And you do not see those ads in the same way you saw in the 90s and early 2000s. So to me, it really is, my legacy would be to operationalize and humanize inclusion so everyone feels seen, so that you know for all you bring to the table, you belong. And ultimately, if we're being really real about it, there is value to unlock for everyone, because no matter your background, if we are more inclusive, we win better. Your year-end bonus is better. You know, there's something for everyone. And the other thing I've talked about with folks is that when you think about when you get to a stoplight and you're on a sidewalk and there's that curb cut in the sidewalk, that is intended largely for people who are in a wheelchair or have some type of physical impairment. But also, if you're riding a bike, if you're juggling children, if you're whatever, that benefits you too. So it's not just a benefit for one group of people, that is a change that fundamentally makes it quality of life better for everyone. So we need to see that the power of belonging and inclusion is something that creates a win for all, not just some. And the more that we expose each other to the different stories and create some aha moments for each other, and expand our lens, I think, you know, we will create better environments for everyone, not just one group.
And that point around creating value is so important. You know, I remember not that long ago working on the bank board, and people were turned down for mortgages because they were in the same-sex relationship. You know, and actually people, as soon as the light bulb moment went on, it was kind of like, we've got to change this. You know, and if that's legislation that's got to be changed, if that's law, then do it. But unless we keep provoking those types of questions, you know, why is that happening? Why? Because we can change it. Things can be changed everywhere if we illuminate it, if we get people behind it, and we share the experiences. I've enjoyed so much today. It's been a fantastic discussion. I said right at the beginning that I'm still learning, and I still am. I've learned so much today. It's been incredible. I'm sure that you'll agree, the speakers that we've had, I said at the beginning, they're all inspirational leaders, and they're all formidable in the cause about inclusion, which I just love. You know, we've learned role models doesn't come, it's not from one person. You know, we take a sprinkling of one and we like what we see in another. But, you know, the most important thing is that the role model that we are for ourselves comes from the truth and comes from the within. Our values, if we only take one thing away, which is to treat people how they like to be treated, universally and globally, we're never going to go far wrong. If you're leading in an organization, make sure that you walk the talk. If you're able to influence policies, processes, and procedures, do it. I think it's a quote from Thomas Edison. I was trying to think for a minute. He said that inspiring is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Now, I think, you know, Monique and Kelly and Catherine are examples of three fantastic leaders who have rolled up their sleeves. They've got stuff done. They're continuing to get stuff done. They're trailblazers. They're firelighters. They're illuminators. They're not radiators. They're not mood hoovers. They're the people that we want to have around us. You've really inspired me, and I hope that everybody listening, you know, takes something away from today's discussion. And if you want to continue the discussion, I'm sure, I think Adam and Andy are going to make sure that you've got everyone's emails and whatever. I think this has been recorded, so there'll be something that you can look back on and reflect. But for now, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight or today. And I want to also thank Kelly, Monique, and Catherine for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.